I was invited to come to this wonderful book festival to talk about a recently published book, a graphic novel called Dr. Worthless, which is about a famous psychiatrist back in New York City who led a crusade against comic books in the 1950s, which he thought were a major cause of juvenile delinquency. And as a result of his campaign, he almost put the comic book industry out of business. My day job for 42 years, actually, was as a professor of American literature at Queens College, one of the senior branches of the City University of New York. So to some extent, I had to write books in order to get tenure and to get promoted. But then at some point, after I had children, I decided to supplement my meager academic income by writing commercial books. And that's how I launched into my career as a commercial writer. I just published a book called 50 States of Murder, which looks at notorious crimes that happen in every state, but that most people outside the state have never heard of. So obviously Louisiana was one of those cases. Also from childhood, I've been very interested in the assassination of Huey Long, and actually am eager to go visit the state capitol where I understand the bullet holes from the shooting are still visible.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
I have to say at the outset, I already told Harold this. I love this book. I grew up on comics. I love graphic novels. I love it when somebody will go into a history that I thought I understood but did not understand. And so I was wrapped. My plan was like to start chapter one and put it down. I just flew through it. Okay. But that being said, and this is my personal opinion, Dr. Wertham is a jerk.
Well,
so why'd you want to write about it? Why'd you want to tell this story?
Well, so Fredric Wertham is very notorious in the world of comic books because in the 1950s he spearheaded a campaign against violence and horror in comic books that led to a Senate hearing and really almost put the comic book industry out of business. So within that world, he's regarded as this villain. It turns out, in a couple of previous books that I wrote a book about the person who many people consider the most evil serial killer in the annals of American crime, a guy named Albert Fish, who I will spare you the details of what he did, but he was basically a cannibal pedophile who went around the country torturing young children for decades before he was caught. When he was captured, his lawyer wanted him to be evaluated because they were thinking of, an insanity plea given the nature of his crimes, and he turned to Fredric Wertham. Wertham at that time was the head of the psychiatric unit at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. So when I was researching that book, I was doing a lot of research into Fredric Wertham at the same time. Then I wrote another book because a lot of my life is taken up with writing about psychopathic sex murder, for better or worse, on a guy named Robert Irwin, who is known as the Mad Sculptor. And in 1937, Irwin committed this horrific triple murder in New York City. And again, Wertham was his examining psychiatrist. So I'd done a lot of research into Wertham's life. I made several trips to the Library of Congress, where Wertham's papers are held. And what I discovered in going through Wertham's papers, that he was not this evil character he has always been portrayed as. My first exposure to Wertham was I came across in the library of a cousin his 1950s book, Seduction of the Innocent. which became a big bestseller, and was the book in which he argued very forcibly about how comic books contain all this material which corrupt the minds of young people and turn them into murderers and killers. It came out, by the way, in the 1950s, as many of you probably know. There was kind of a moral panic in the country about juvenile delinquency. There was a famous poll taken in which the American public listed juvenile delinquency as the number one problem ahead of open-air nuclear testing, which fortunately we're about to have more of. But anyway, so Wertham's book tapped into that. And that's how I first became aware of Wertham. So I always thought of him, because I was a comic book fan, I had this enormous collection of comic books. So I always thought of him the same way, the guy who almost killed the comics. But in doing this research, I discovered there were all these other dimensions to his life. It turned out he was really a very progressive thinker. He was a very key figure in the civil rights movement of the 1950s. He opened the first psychiatric clinic in Harlem to treat inner city young black people. It was called the LaFargue Clinic. He opened it along with Richard Wright and Ralph Ellison. The three of them got together. And one of the things I discovered in his papers were letters from Thurgood Marshall, thanking him for his contributions. His testimony was very key in the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. So I realized there was this whole other dimension to Wertham, and that his reputation really needed to be rehabilitated in some way. And for a while, I was actually gave serious thought to writing a whole biography of Wertham, and that I put that aside for other projects. And then, anyway, I had this collaborator, Eric Powell, whom I regard as the greatest living American comic book artist. He's best known for a series called The Goon. Have you seen it? And he had approached me about doing a book about Ed Gein, the infamous Wisconsin ghoul, who is now the subject of a really bad Netflix series that basically makes everything up. Anyway, he and I did this graphic novel, and then we were talking about a possible follow-up, and I said, I always thought maybe writing a biography of Wertham, and he loved the idea, hence the book. From what I've seen of it so far, it looks amazing. And I just spoke to someone who said last year you got 30,000 people. So, any celebration of literacy and books like this is amazingly important, particularly in this day and age when, from everything I've read, literacy rates have seriously declined. You should come. I mean, I've never been to the book festival. I didn't even know it existed till I was invited. But now that I am here, I just think it's a wonderful event.